The rain came down in sheets that Sunday afternoon, drumming against the stained glass windows of St. Mary's Catholic Church like fingers tapping out a mournful rhythm. Margaret Maggie Anderson sat in the front pew, her spine straight as a rod, despite the weight pressing down on her chest. A weight that had nothing to do with the black wool coat she wore, and everything to do with the mahogany casket 10 feet in front of her. James, her boy, her only child, gone at 45. The organ wheezed out the opening notes of Amazing Grace, and Maggie's fingers tightened around the lace handkerchief in her lap, the same one her mother had carried at her own husband's funeral back in Dublin, 60 years ago. The fabric was thin now, worn soft by grief and time, but it still smelled faintly of lavender sachets and old prayers. How sweet the sound! The voices of the congregation rose around her, but Maggie couldn't join them. Her throat had closed up 3 days ago, right around the time the police officer showed up at her door with his hat in his hands and that look on his face. The one that said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but there's been an accident." Black ice, a guardrail, the Chesapeake Bay Bridge at 2 in the morning. Just like that, her James was gone. Beside her, 16-year-old Emma trembled like a leaf in a storm, her thin shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Maggie pulled the girl closer, pressing her granddaughter's dark head against her shoulder. Emma smelled like drugstore shampoo and teenage heartbreak, a scent Maggie knew all too well from her 40 years as a nurse. You didn't spend 4 decades in Johns Hopkins emergency room without learning to recognize grief in all its forms. "It's all right, love," Maggie whispered, her Irish accent thickening the way it always did when emotions ran high. "Let it out. Don't you dare hold it in." Emma's body convulsed with a fresh wave of tears, and Maggie felt her own eyes burn. But she wouldn't cry. Not yet. Not here. She'd learned long ago that sometimes you had to be the strong one, the rock everyone else clung to when the waters rose too high. Across the aisle, 3 rows back, Natalie Cunningham Anderson sat with her legs crossed, one Louboutin-clad foot bouncing impatiently. Even from here, Maggie could see the glow of her daughter-in-law's phone screen as she scrolled through something. Emails, probably, or maybe listings for the new condos going up in Harbor East. At her own husband's funeral, Natalie's blonde hair was styled in perfect waves, her black Chanel dress fitted just so, and her makeup, dear God, her makeup was camera-ready, complete with contouring and that Instagram-perfect highlight on her cheekbones. She looked like she was heading to a networking event, not saying goodbye to the man she'd supposedly loved for 20 years. Maggie's jaw tightened, but she forced herself to look away. Father Patrick O'Brien stood at the pulpit now, his weathered face grave as he opened his Bible. "We gather today," he began, his Irish brogue even thicker than Maggie's, "to celebrate the life of James Michael Anderson, a son, a father, a friend, and a man of quiet grace." Quiet. Yes, that was James. Always had been. Even as a boy, he'd been the type to sit in the corner with his sketch pad, drawing buildings that existed only in his imagination, soaring towers and graceful arches, all rendered in careful pencil strokes. He'd wanted to be an architect since he was 7 years old, when Maggie had taken him to see the Washington Monument, and he'd stared up at it for so long she'd thought he'd gone into a trance. "Mom," he'd whispered, tugging on her sleeve, "did you know people built that? With their hands?" She'd laughed then, ruffling his dark hair. "That's right, love. People can build anything if they've got the vision and the grit." He'd built plenty over the years. Beautiful homes, elegant office buildings, even that community center down in Fells Point that won some fancy award. But somewhere along the way, he'd stopped building for himself and started building for Natalie's approval. Started chasing bigger commissions, flashier projects, anything to keep her happy. And it had killed him. Not literally, maybe, but close enough. Father Patrick's voice swelled with emotion as he read from Ecclesiastes. "To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under heaven, a time to be born, and a time to die." Emma let out a choked sob and Maggie tightened her grip on the girl's shoulder. "Hold on, darling," she murmured. "Just a little longer." The service dragged on, hymns and prayers and readings from people who'd known James but hadn't really known him. Not the way Maggie did. Not the way he'd been at 3 years old, running through the apartment in his Superman pajamas. Not at 15, staying up past midnight to help her study for her nursing boards, even though he had his own exams the next day. Not at 25, calling her from California in tears because Natalie had just told him she was pregnant and he wasn't ready. Wasn't sure, wasn't enough. You're always enough, Maggie had told him then. Don't you ever forget that. But he had forgotten. Or maybe Natalie had made him forget. Finally, Father Patrick concluded with a blessing, and the pallbearers stepped forward to carry the casket out. Maggie rose on shaky legs, Emma clinging to her arm like a barnacle. Together they followed James's body down the aisle, past the sea of pitying faces and whispered condolences. Maggie kept her eyes forward, her chin up. She'd gotten through her husband Patrick's funeral 8 years ago without breaking, and she'd get through this one too. Later, in the privacy of her own room, she'd let herself shatter. But not now, not where people could see. They were almost to the door when she felt it, a presence at her elbow, a waft of Chanel number, 5 so strong it made her nose itch. Natalie. "Margaret," her daughter-in-law murmured, leaning in close. Too close. Her breath was minty from gum, her voice syrupy sweet. "We need to talk. After this is over." Maggie didn't look at her. "Not now, Natalie." "Oh, I think now is exactly the time." Natalie's voice dropped lower, hardening around the edges. "Because after today you've got 72 hours to pack your things and get out of my house." Maggie's steps faltered. Emma gasped softly, her grip on Maggie's arm tightening. Natalie continued, relentless. "I've already contacted Pleasant Meadows Senior Living in Delaware. They've got an opening, shared room, but it's affordable on a nurse's pension. I'm sure you'll manage just fine." For a moment, Maggie couldn't breathe. The church walls seemed to close in, the organ music fading to a dull roar in her ears. She stopped walking and turned slowly, meeting Natalie's eyes for the first time that day. They were blue. Ice blue. Empty blue. "Excuse me?" Maggie's voice came out steady, but only just. Natalie's smile didn't waver. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. James is gone. The house is mine now, and frankly I can't afford to support another mouth, especially one that doesn't contribute anything." "Grandma does contribute," Emma hissed, her young face flushed with anger. "She cooks, she cleans, she takes care of—" "Emma, hush!" Natalie didn't even glance at her daughter. "The adults are talking." Something cold and hard settled in Maggie's chest, a feeling she recognized from years of dealing with difficult patients, abusive spouses, and bureaucrats who thought a 67-year-old woman didn't deserve respect. She straightened her shoulders, adjusted the black hat perched on her silver hair, and looked Natalie dead in the eye. "The Lord teaches us patience, Natalie," she said quietly, "but he also teaches us about truth, and justice, and consequences." Natalie blinked, clearly thrown. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Maggie said, her Irish accent sharpening each word like a blade, "that you should be very, very careful about what you do next, because sometimes the house you think you own—" She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "Turns out to belong to someone else entirely." Before Natalie could respond, Maggie turned and walked out of the church, Emma at her side, leaving her daughter-in-law standing in the doorway with her mouth hanging open like a fish. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still the color of old bruises. Maggie helped Emma into the passenger seat of her ancient Honda Accord, a 2006 model with a dent in the bumper and a radio that only picked up AM stations, and climbed behind the wheel. For a long moment they sat in silence, watching the other mourners file out of the church and into their sleek cars with their designer umbrellas. "Grandma?" Emma's voice was small, broken. "What did you mean? About the house?" Maggie started the engine, the old car coughing to life with a rattle that would have embarrassed Natalie to her core. "I meant," she said slowly, "that your mother doesn't know everything she thinks she knows." "But she said—" "I know what she said." Maggie pulled out of the parking lot, her hand steady on the wheel. "And in 72 hours she's going to learn a very important lesson." "What lesson?" Maggie glanced at her granddaughter, this beautiful, brave girl who'd lost her father and was about to lose her mother in a different, more devastating way. "That you should never, ever underestimate an old Irish woman who's spent her whole life fighting for what's hers." Emma managed a weak smile. "Are you going to fight her, Grandma?" Maggie's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite a grimace. "Oh, sweetheart," she said softly, "I'm not going to fight her. I'm going to destroy her." The house on Guilford Road had been Maggie's castle for 42 years. She'd bought it in 1982 with money saved from 15 years of double shifts, working nights at Johns Hopkins while raising James on her own after Patrick's drinking got so bad she had to choose between her marriage and her sanity. The house had cost $47,000, a fortune back then, and every penny of it had been earned with aching feet, bloodshot eyes, and hands that smelled permanently of antiseptic. It was a 3-story Victorian painted slate blue with white trim, built in 1928 by a German immigrant who'd made his fortune in shipbuilding. The windows were original, wavy glass in oak frames that let in the morning light like honey. The floors were heart pine, scarred and beautiful, and the stairs creaked in a way that meant you always knew when someone was coming. Maggie loved every inch of it. She loved the kitchen with its ancient gas stove and the herb garden she'd planted in the backyard, rosemary and thyme and lavender that bloomed purple every June. She loved the master bedroom where she'd rocked James to sleep as a baby, humming Danny Boy until his eyes fluttered closed. She loved the attic that still smelled like old books and the basement where Patrick had built a workbench and taught James how to use a level. This house was her home, and Natalie wanted to take it away. The invasion began 48 hours after the funeral. Maggie was in the kitchen making tea when she heard the front door slam open. Heavy footsteps echoed through the hallway, too heavy to be Emma, too confident to be apologetic. "Margaret?" Natalie's voice rang out, sharp and businesslike. "I'm here with the estate appraiser. Don't mind us." Maggie set down her teacup carefully, feeling her blood pressure spike the way it used to when a cocky resident would try to overrule her in the ER. Deep breath. Count to 10. She walked into the living room just in time to see Natalie, dressed in tailored gray slacks and a cream silk blouse, gesturing broadly to a thin man with a clipboard. "As you can see, the bones are good," Natalie was saying. "Victorian charm, original hardwood, high ceilings. I'm thinking we market it as a luxury renovation opportunity. Price point around $1.4 million, maybe $1.5 if we get the right buyer." The appraiser nodded, scribbling notes. Maggie cleared her throat. "Natalie?" Her daughter-in-law turned, eyebrows raised. "Oh, Margaret. Good. I was just about to come find you. This is Leonard from Prestige Property Valuations. He's going to be assessing the house for market listing." "I see." Maggie folded her arms across her chest. "And when exactly did you plan on telling me about this?" Natalie's smile was all teeth, no warmth. "I'm telling you now. Don't worry. You've still got 24 hours to pack. I'm being generous." "Generous," Maggie repeated the word like it tasted bad. "That's an interesting choice. Look, I know this is difficult for you." Natalie's voice took on that condescending tone that made Maggie want to throw something. "But James left behind substantial debts. The mortgage alone is—" "There is no mortgage," Maggie interrupted. Natalie blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said there's no mortgage. The house was paid off in 1997. "That's—" Natalie's composure slipped, just for a second. "That's impossible. James refinanced in 2015 to pay for the office expansion." "No," Maggie said calmly. "He said he refinanced. What he actually did was borrow $75,000 from me." The appraiser shifted uncomfortably, suddenly very interested in his shoes. Natalie's jaw tightened. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but—" "No games, dear. Just facts." Maggie picked up her teacup again, taking a delicate sip. "But please, continue with your appraisal. I'm sure Leonard here is billing by the hour." For a moment, Natalie looked like she might explode. Her face flushed red, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her palms. But then she took a breath, smoothed her hair, and turned back to the appraiser with a brittle smile. "Let's move upstairs," she said tightly. They disappeared, and Maggie sat down in her armchair, the one Patrick had reupholstered himself back when his hands were steady and his eyes were clear, and waited. Over the next 2 hours, she listened to Natalie parade through her home like a conquering general, pointing out potential and opportunities and value adds. She heard her daughter-in-law in James's old bedroom, dismissing his childhood sketches as clutter. In the master bath, criticizing the dated tile that Maggie had chosen because it reminded her of the sea. In the attic, calling Maggie's carefully preserved boxes of photographs and Patrick's tools junk that needs hauling. When they finally left, Natalie paused in the doorway. "By the way," she said, not quite meeting Maggie's eyes, "I've scheduled an open house for this Sunday, 2 to 5. I'll need you to make yourself scarce. Maybe take Emma out for ice cream or something. Prospective buyers don't want to see—" She waved a hand vaguely. "You know, old ladies." Maggie supplied helpfully. I was going to say distractions, but sure. Natalie checked her phone. Oh, and one more thing. I'm having the locks changed tomorrow. For security. I'll get you a key, but you'll need to start keeping track of when you come and go, just until the sale goes through. She left before Maggie could respond. The house felt different after that, violated somehow, like a stranger had walked through it wearing muddy boots. Maggie sat in the sudden silence, listening to the old walls settle and the radiators clank. Then she stood up, walked to the basement door, and descended into the darkness. The basement smelled like concrete and old wood and secrets. Maggie flipped the light switch and the ancient fluorescent bulbs flickered to life with a reluctant buzz. The space was larger than people expected, 600 square feet of unfinished storage that ran the length of the house. Patrick's workbench still stood against the far wall, dusty and unused since his death. Boxes of Christmas decorations were stacked in one corner, and in another, behind a rack of off-season clothes, sat a dented filing cabinet and a green military surplus safe. Maggie knelt in front of the safe, her knees protesting. She was 67, not 27, and her body liked to remind her of that fact daily. July 14th, 1978. James's birthday. The lock clicked open. Inside, organized with the same meticulous care Maggie had used to arrange medication carts for 40 years, were 3 manila folders. She pulled out the first one, labeled in her own careful handwriting, property documents. The original deed was right on top, the paper yellowed but the ink still dark and clear. This deed, made this 12th day of August, 1982, between Charles W. Morrison, seller, and Margaret O'Sullivan, buyer. Her maiden name, before she'd married Patrick, before she'd become an Anderson. The purchase price, $47,000. She remembered that day like it was yesterday. 26 years old, single mother, standing in the title office with a cashier's check that represented every spare dollar she'd earned since James was born. The lawyer had looked at her like she was crazy. A woman, alone, buying a house in Guilford? Are you sure you can afford this, Miss O'Sullivan? He'd asked, not unkindly. I can afford it, she'd replied, because I earned it. And she had. God, she had. Maggie traced her finger over the signature, then set the deed aside and reached for the second folder. Investment records. 12 certificates of deposit, ranging from $5,000 to $20,000 each. Total value, $340,000. Stock certificates for blue-chip companies, Johnson & Johnson, Procter & Gamble, Coca-Cola. Bought steadily over 30 years, reinvesting dividends, never touching the principal. Current value, approximately $180,000. A savings account statement from Navy Federal Credit Union. Balance $95,000. All told, Maggie Anderson, retired nurse, supposed burden, allegedly broke old woman, had just over $615,000 in liquid assets. She'd never told James. Never told anyone except Dennis Walsh, her accountant, and Sarah Mitchell, her lawyer and friend of 20 years. It wasn't that she didn't trust her son. It was that she didn't trust Natalie. And judging by the current situation, her instincts had been dead on. The third folder was the hardest to open. Loan agreement, J. and N. Anderson. The paper was crisp white, dated October 15th, 2018. Maggie's lawyer had drawn it up, professional and binding, whereas Margaret Anderson, lender, agrees to loan the sum of $75,000 to James Anderson and Natalie Cunningham Anderson, borrowers, for the purpose of commercial real estate investment, to be repaid at 3% annual interest over 5 years. James's signature was at the bottom, shaky and uncertain. Natalie's was bold, confident. And in the margin, in James's handwriting, was a note that still made Maggie's heart clench. Mom, I'm so sorry. I'll pay you back. I promise. I love you. J. There was a water stain on the paper. Maggie had always assumed it was from a glass. Now, looking at it again, she realized it was shaped wrong, elongated, like a tear. Her son had been crying when he signed this. Maggie pressed the paper to her chest and let herself feel it. All the anger, all the grief, all the bone-deep fury at a woman who'd taken her beautiful, gentle boy and broken him piece by piece until there was nothing left but apologies and debt. But she didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she stood up, tucked all 3 folders under her arm, and climbed the basement stairs with the steady, purposeful gait of a woman who'd spent 40 years walking into rooms where people were dying and refusing to let them go without a fight. Natalie wanted a war? Fine. She'd get one. but she'd be fighting an Irish nurse who'd scraped her way out of poverty, raised a son alone, and survived every goddamn thing life had thrown at her for 67 years. And Margaret Anderson never, ever lost. Sarah Mitchell's law office occupied the 12th floor of a glass tower in Harbor East, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the glittering waters of Baltimore's Inner Harbor. On a clear day, you could see all the way to Fort McHenry, where the Star-Spangled Banner had flown during the War of 1812. Today, the sky was overcast, the harbor gray and choppy. Fitting, Maggie thought, given the battle she was about to wage. She sat in one of Sarah's ergonomic chairs, the kind that probably cost more than Maggie's first car, clutching her 3 manila folders like a lifeline. Across the desk, Sarah Mitchell studied the documents with the same intense focus she'd brought to everything since they'd met at a domestic violence support group 20 years ago. Maggie had been there as a nurse volunteer. Sarah had been there as a newly minted lawyer trying to make a difference. They'd been friends ever since. Sarah was 58 now, her dark hair shot through with silver, her brown skin smooth despite the stress lines around her eyes. She wore a charcoal pantsuit and tortoiseshell glasses that gave her the look of someone who didn't suffer fools gladly, which Maggie knew was absolutely true. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, Sarah muttered, flipping through the loan agreement. This is ironclad, Mags. Notarized, witnessed, the whole 9 yards. And she hasn't paid back a dime? Not 1 cent. Maggie accepted the cup of coffee Sarah's paralegal had brought. Real coffee, from one of those fancy Italian machines that hissed and gurgled like a dragon. I checked the account last week. She's supposed to make monthly payments of $1,250. The last deposit was in January 2019, 5 years ago. Sarah did quick mental math. That's over $75,000 in missed payments plus interest. $78,462. Maggie had always been good with numbers. As of yesterday. And the deed? Sarah held up the yellowed document like it was the Holy Grail. This is gorgeous. Original, filed with the city, never legally transferred. Maggie, this alone gives you total ownership. But she has papers, Maggie said. Natalie showed me something years ago. Said James put the house in his name for estate planning purposes. Sarah's expression turned grim. Let me guess. A quitclaim deed? Maggie nodded. Did you sign it? I did back in 2010. Natalie said it was to protect the house from being taken if I ever needed Medicaid for a nursing home. She made it sound like I was doing James a favor. Fucking vulture. Sarah caught herself. Sorry, but seriously, did you have it notarized? Maggie frowned, trying to remember. I don't think so. Natalie said it wasn't necessary for family transfers. Sarah's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Then it's not worth the paper it's printed on. In Maryland, a quitclaim deed must be notarized to be valid. Without that, you're still the legal owner of record. For the first time in days, Maggie felt something like hope unfurling in her chest. So she can't sell it? She can try, but the title search will flag the discrepancy immediately. Any reputable buyer will walk away the second they see the ownership is disputed. Sarah leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. But here's the thing, Mags. We can play defense all day, block the sale, file an injunction, drag this out in civil court for months. But if you really want to nail her to the wall, she paused, eyes glinting. We need to prove fraud, coercion, elder abuse. And for that, we need evidence that she deliberately manipulated you and James. Maggie reached into her purse and pulled out a small cassette tape, the kind that hadn't been manufactured since the early 2000s. The plastic was scratched, the label written in James's careful handwriting. For Mom, if anything happens. Sarah's eyebrows rose. Is that what I think it is? James gave it to me 3 weeks before the accident, Maggie said quietly. He came over for dinner, without Natalie, which was unusual. Emma was at a friend's house. It was just the 2 of us. He seemed anxious, kept checking his phone, jumping at every noise. She turned the tape over in her hands, remembering. Mom, James had said, pushing a small padded envelope across the kitchen table. I need you to keep this somewhere safe. Don't listen to it unless something happens to me. James, you're scaring me. What's going on? Nothing. I hope it's nothing. Just promise me, please. Sarah held out her hand. May I? Maggie hesitated, then passed over the tape. Sarah crossed to an old credenza in the corner, mahogany, probably an antique, and opened a bottom drawer to reveal a dusty cassette player that looked like it belonged in a museum. "Don't ask," Sarah said, catching Maggie's expression. "I keep it for estate cases. You'd be surprised how many people leave their last words on old tech." She inserted the tape and pressed play. For a moment, there was nothing but static and the faint hum of recording equipment. Then James's voice filled the room, and Maggie's breath caught in her throat. "Mom, if you're listening to this, then I'm probably gone. God, I hope you never have to hear this, but I need you to know the truth." A pause, the sound of James clearing his throat, gathering courage. "The house. The title transfer in 2010. Natalie forced me to do it. She said if I didn't sign it over, she'd leave me and take Emma. She said you were getting old, that you might develop dementia or need expensive medical care, and the state could seize the house to pay for it. She said it was the only way to protect our family." His voice cracked. "I was weak, Mom. I should have stood up to her, should have protected you. But I was terrified of losing Emma, so I did what she wanted. I forged your signature on the notarization. Natalie's assistant, some woman named Melissa Tran, stamped it without asking questions. It's fraud. I know it's fraud, and I've been living with that guilt for 8 years." More static, the sound of James crying, trying to muffle it. "There's more. The business loan you gave us in 2018. Natalie told me it was for her real estate office, but that's not where the money went. Her father, Richard Cunningham, was in debt. Bad debt. Gambling, failed investments, I don't even know all of it. Natalie's been funneling money to him for years, trying to keep him out of bankruptcy. That $75,000 you lent us? She wired $60,000 of it to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands." Sarah and Maggie exchanged sharp glances. "I found the bank statements last month. Confronted her about it. She denied everything at first, then she threatened me, Mom. Said if I went to the police or told you the truth, she'd take Emma and disappear. Said she had connections, lawyers, money hidden where I'd never find it. Said she'd make sure I never saw my daughter again." A long, shuddering breath. "I was going to file for divorce. Had the papers drawn up, talked to a lawyer. But then Natalie found out. She started being different. Nice, almost. Said she wanted to work on our marriage, go to counseling. I wanted to believe her, Mom. I really did." Another pause. "But I'm making this tape just in case. Because if something happens to me, an accident, a sudden illness, anything, I need you to know it wasn't random. I need you to protect Emma. Don't let Natalie take everything you've built. You deserve better. Emma deserves better." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I love you, Mom. I'm so sorry. I should have been stronger. Should have been the son you raised me to be. Please forgive me." The tape clicked off. The silence filled the office, broken only by the distant sound of traffic 12 floors below and the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Maggie sat frozen, tears streaming down her face, while Sarah stared at the cassette player with an expression of cold, calculated fury. "That bitch," Sarah said quietly. "That absolute fucking bitch." She turned to Maggie, and her voice was steel. "We're not just stopping the sale, Mags. We're taking her down. Fraud, coercion, possible financial crimes, conspiracy to commit bankruptcy fraud, and depending on what really happened with James's accident." She let the implication hang in the air. Maggie wiped her eyes, her grief hardening into something sharper, more focused. "What do we need to do?" Sarah pulled out a legal pad and started writing. "First, I'm calling Dennis Walsh. We need a full forensic accounting of every dollar Natalie's touched in the last decade. Second, I'm filing an emergency motion to block the sale and freeze her assets. Third," she looked up, a predatory smile crossing her face, "we're going to let her have her little open house this Sunday. Let her parade buyers through your home. Make her promises about closing dates and commission checks. Let her think she's won." "And then?" Maggie asked. "And then," Sarah said, "we show up with the cavalry and burn her whole world down." Sunday arrived with unseasonably warm weather. One of those freak March days where the temperature hit 65, and everyone in Baltimore suddenly remembered what sunshine felt like. Perfect open house weather. Natalie had gone all out. By the time Maggie returned from her morning walk, she'd deliberately stayed away all morning, following Sarah's instructions to let her set the trap. Guilford Road was lined with luxury cars. BMWs, Mercedes, even a Tesla or two. A professionally printed sign stood in the front yard. Historic Guilford Victorian, $1.45 million. Open house, 2 to 5 p.m., Cunningham Luxury. Realty balloons bobbed in the breeze, silver and gold, because of course Natalie would choose the most ostentatious colors possible. Through the front windows, Maggie could see strangers walking through her living room, pointing at the crown molding, testing the hardwood floors. Her hands clenched around her purse strap. Steady, Maggie. Steady. She walked up the front path, nodding politely to a young couple who were leaving. They looked excited, probably already imagining their furniture in the space, their children playing in the yard. Maggie felt a pang of guilt. These people had no idea they were being scammed. Inside, the house smelled like fresh-baked cookies, a realtor's trick older than dirt. Natalie stood in the foyer in a cream silk blouse and tailored navy pants, her blonde hair blown out to perfection, greeting potential buyers with the kind of dazzling smile that sold million-dollar properties. Welcome, welcome. Feel free to explore. All 3 floors are open, and there's a lovely garden out back. She spotted Maggie, and her smile faltered for just a second before snapping back into place. Margaret, I thought I asked you to make yourself scarce today. It's my home, Maggie said mildly. I'm allowed to be here. A muscle twitched in Natalie's jaw. Fine, just stay in the kitchen or something. Don't talk to the buyers. She turned away to charm a well-dressed couple admiring the original fireplace mantel. Maggie walked through the crowded house, watching strangers poke through closets and peer into cabinets. In the dining room, a man was taking photos of the built-in china cabinet where Maggie kept her grandmother's dishes. In the upstairs hallway, a woman was measuring windows for curtains. And in James's old bedroom, now stripped of his childhood drawings and model airplanes, Emma sat on the floor, hugging her knees to her chest, silent tears rolling down her face. Maggie's heart broke all over again. She sat down beside her granddaughter, wrapping an arm around those thin shoulders. Not much longer now, love. I hate this, Emma whispered. I hate her. Is that wrong? To hate your own mother? Oh, sweetheart. Maggie kissed the top of Emma's head. You don't hate her. You hate what she's doing. That's different. She's selling Dad's room, like he never existed. Your dad exists, Maggie said firmly. He exists in you, in every kind thing you do, every time you stand up for what's right. That's James living on. She can't sell that. Emma leaned into her grandmother's embrace, and they sat there together while strangers trooped past, oblivious to their grief. Downstairs, Maggie could hear Natalie's pitch growing more animated. Yes, the bones are incredible. Original 1928 construction. The previous owner really let it go, but with the right renovation budget, this could be a showstopper. Marble countertops in the kitchen, spa bathroom upstairs, maybe convert the attic to a master suite. Previous owner, like Maggie was already gone. At precisely 3:15 p.m., the front door opened and 3 people walked in. Sarah Mitchell, in a tailored black suit and carrying a leather briefcase. Dennis Walsh, 70 years old, with thinning white hair and the kind of face that had seen every financial scam in the book. And Father Patrick O'Brien, still in his clerical collar from the early Mass, his Irish brogue thick enough to cut. Natalie's smile froze. Sarah, what are you doing here? Afternoon, Natalie. Sarah's voice was pleasant, professional. Beautiful day for an open house. I'm here as a potential buyer. You're not a buyer? You're Margaret's lawyer? I can be both. Sarah smiled. Maryland's a free state, after all. The other prospective buyers had stopped their browsing now, sensing drama. The couple by the fireplace exchanged glances. The man taking photos lowered his phone. Dennis Walsh opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Actually, Ms. Cunningham, I'm here in my capacity as the Anderson family accountant. I have some concerns about this sale I'd like to address. Natalie's face went pale, then red. This is harassment. I'm calling the police. Go ahead, Sarah said calmly. I'm sure they'd be very interested in the documentation we've brought. Father Patrick stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. Natalie lass, I've known this family for 30 years. I married you and James, baptized Emma, and I'm here today to bear witness to the truth. Witness to what? Natalie's voice pitched higher. This is my house. James left it to me. Did he? Sarah set her briefcase on the coffee table. Patrick's coffee table, the one he'd built with his own hands, and opened it. Because according to the Baltimore City property records, the legal owner of 2847 Guilford Road is, and has always been, Margaret O'Sullivan Anderson. She pulled out a document and held it up for everyone to see. This is the original deed, filed August 12, 1982. Would you like to examine it? The prospective buyers moved closer, curiosity overcoming politeness. Natalie snatched the paper from Sarah's hand, her eyes scanning frantically. This doesn't mean anything. The title was transferred to James in 2010. I have the paperwork. Do you? Dennis Walsh adjusted his glasses. Because I've been the Anderson family CPA for 35 years, and I have no record of any such transfer. What you have, Ms. Cunningham, is a fraudulent quitclaim deed with a forged notarization. The room went dead silent. That's slander, Natalie hissed. It's a fact, Dennis replied. And it's a matter of public record. The document you claim transfers ownership was never properly notarized, making it legally void under Maryland real estate law. One of the prospective buyers, a middle-aged woman in a Burberry coat, cleared her throat. I'm sorry, are you saying this property isn't actually yours to sell? Natalie whirled on her. Of course it's mine. This is just, we're trying to prevent fraud, Sarah interrupted smoothly. And I'd advise anyone considering making an offer on this property to consult with their own attorney first. The title is currently disputed, which means any sale would be legally questionable at best. The Burberry woman grabbed her husband's arm. Let's go. Within minutes, the house emptied like someone had pulled a fire alarm. Prospective buyers filed out, some apologetic, some annoyed, all of them clearly wanting no part of whatever legal mess they'd stumbled into. Soon it was just Natalie, Sarah, Dennis, Father Patrick, and Maggie, who'd come downstairs with Emma during the commotion. Natalie stood in the center of her imploding world, mascara starting to run, her perfect hair beginning to frizz in the humidity. You can't do this, she said, her voice breaking. This is my house. James wanted me to have it. No, came a voice from the doorway. He didn't. Everyone turned. Emma stood there, 13 years old but looking ancient with grief and anger, holding a small envelope. Dad left me a letter, she said, walking into the room with her chin held high, so much like Maggie it made Sarah smile. He gave it to Father Patrick to give to me when I turned 16, but Father Patrick thought now was the right time. She held up the envelope, her father's handwriting clear on the front. For Emma Rose. When you're old enough to understand. Natalie lunged for it. Give me that. No. Emma stepped back, and Father Patrick moved to stand beside her, a protective presence. The girl opened the envelope with shaking hands and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Her eyes scanned the words, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Then she looked up at her mother, and her voice was clear and cold. Dad says you threatened him, says you made him choose between you and Grandma, says he was going to leave you, but he was afraid you'd take me away and he'd never see me again. She took a breath. He says if anything happens to him, I should stay with Grandma Maggie, because she's the only one who ever really loved him. Natalie's face crumpled. Emma, baby, that's not... He didn't understand. He understood perfectly, Maggie said quietly, stepping forward. He understood that you never loved him. You loved his name, his potential, what you thought he could give you. But the man himself, the gentle, kind, creative soul who just wanted to build beautiful things and raise his daughter in peace? She shook her head. You saw him as weak, as a means to an end. And when he finally found the courage to stand up to you, you made sure he regretted it. Natalie's eyes went wild. What are you implying? I'm not implying anything, Maggie said. I'm stating facts. My son died in a single car accident on a road he'd driven 1,000 times, at 2 a.m, when he should have been home in bed, coming from a direction that made no sense unless he'd been driving away from something. She stepped closer. Or someone. The air in the room turned electric. Sarah cleared her throat. That's a separate matter for the authorities to investigate. Right now, we're here about the house. She pulled out another document. This is a loan agreement dated October 2018. Margaret Anderson lent you and James $75,000 to start your real estate business. The terms stipulated monthly payments of $1,250 over 5 years. You've made exactly 3 payments. Total amount owed, including interest, $78,462. She handed the document to Natalie. You have 30 days to pay in full, or we file a lawsuit for breach of contract. And given that you've been attempting to sell collateral you don't own... Sarah's smile was razor sharp. I'd say your real estate license is about to become the least of your problems. Natalie stared at the loan agreement, her hands trembling, her whole world collapsing around her designer shoes. And for the first time since Maggie had known her, Natalie Cunningham had absolutely nothing to say. The silence in the living room stretched like taffy, thick and uncomfortable. Natalie stood frozen, the loan agreement trembling in her hands, her perfectly applied makeup beginning to crack along the stress lines around her mouth. Dennis Walsh cleared his throat, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses with the methodical precision of a man who'd spent 50 years making numbers tell stories people didn't want to hear. Ms. Cunningham, he said, his voice gravelly with age. There's another matter we need to discuss. He opened his laptop, an ancient Dell that probably still ran Windows XP, and turned it so everyone could see the screen. A bank statement filled the display, rows and rows of transactions in black and white. What is this? Natalie whispered. This, Dennis said, is a financial record from First Caribbean International Bank in the Cayman Islands. Account number ending in 7734, registered under the name Natalie R. Cunningham. The room seemed to tilt. How did you... That's private. That's illegal search and seizure. Actually, Sarah interjected smoothly, it's part of a federal investigation into bankruptcy fraud. Your father, Richard Cunningham, is currently being investigated by the FBI for hiding assets from creditors. When they subpoenaed his financial records, your account showed up as a recipient of multiple wire transfers. She pulled out another document, this one emblazoned with the FBI seal. According to federal investigators, you've been funneling money to your father for the past 6 years. Money that should have been disclosed in his bankruptcy proceedings. That's a felony, Natalie. Multiple felonies, actually. Dennis clicked through the account statements. The most interesting transaction is from October 23, 2018. A wire transfer of $60,000 from your joint account with James, just 8 days after Margaret lent you $75,000. He looked at Natalie over his glasses. You told James that money was for your real estate office. New computers, marketing materials, office space deposits. But $60,000 of it went straight to the Caymans, to help your father hide assets from the bankruptcy court. Emma's voice cut through the tension, small and broken. You stole from Grandma to help Grandpa? Natalie's face had gone from red to white to a sickly gray. I was trying to save my family. My father was going to lose everything. So you decided to steal from mine? Maggie's Irish accent thickened with fury. You took money I saved doing double shifts for 40 years. Money I lent you in good faith because you were my son's wife. And you sent it to a criminal to help him commit fraud? He's not a criminal. He's my father. And James was my son. Maggie's voice cracked like thunder. And you used him, manipulated him, threatened to take his daughter away if he didn't dance to your tune. What kind of person does that? Natalie's composure finally shattered. She sank onto the couch, Patrick's couch, the brown leather one he'd bought at an estate sale and lovingly restored, and buried her face in her hands. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she sobbed. I needed the money. Dad was in trouble. The business was failing. James was never going to make partner at his firm. He was too soft, too nice. Someone had to be practical. Someone had to make the hard choices. Hard choices? Father Patrick's voice was quiet but carried the weight of absolute moral authority. Lass, there's a difference between hard choices and wicked ones. You chose wickedness, and you dressed it up in pretty words to make yourself feel better about it. Sarah pulled out yet another document. She seemed to have an endless supply of them, each one more damning than the last. There's one more thing, Natalie. James's life insurance policy. Natalie's head snapped up, mascara streaking her cheeks like war paint. What about it? The policy was for $500,000. When James first took it out in 2005, the beneficiary was Emma Anderson, with Margaret as trustee until Emma turned 25. Standard setup for a responsible parent. Sarah's eyes glinted. But in December of last year, 2 months before James died, the beneficiary was changed to you. The change form was notarized by a Melissa Tran, who at the time was your administrative assistant at Cunningham Luxury Realty. She handed the document to Dennis, who projected it onto his laptop screen for everyone to see. The problem is, Dennis said, Melissa Tran is not, and has never been a licensed notary in the state of Maryland, which means this beneficiary change form is fraudulent. Emma gasped. Mom tried to steal Dad's life insurance? Not just tried, sweetheart. Sarah's voice was gentle when she addressed Emma, but hardened to steel when she turned back to Natalie. She succeeded. The insurance company paid out the full $500,000 to Natalie Cunningham 3 weeks ago. That money was for Emma's college fund. Maggie's voice shook with rage. James wanted Emma to go to Johns Hopkins like her grandmother. He told me that a dozen times. Natalie stood up abruptly, wobbling on her designer heels. I needed that money. Do you have any idea how much debt James left behind? How much his artistic vision cost me over the years? All those projects he took that barely paid anything because they were meaningful. All those weekends he wasted sketching buildings nobody would ever construct. Her voice rose to a shriek. I gave up everything for him. I could have married Andrew Sutton. He's a cardiac surgeon now, makes $500,000 a year. But I chose James because I thought he had potential. I thought I could make something out of him. And what did I get? A man who cried when he had to fire people, who gave away his time to charity projects, who wanted to build community centers instead of luxury condos. Emma stood up, her young face twisted with grief and fury. You're talking about my dad like he was a failure. He was. Natalie spun on her daughter. He was weak and soft, and he would have ended up poor and forgotten if it weren't for me pushing him every single day to be better, to want more, to... Slap. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. Emma stood with her hand still raised, tears streaming down her face, her whole body shaking. Don't you ever talk about my dad like that again, she said, her voice deadly quiet. He was the best man I've ever known. He was kind and good, and he loved me. Really loved me. Not like you. You only love yourself. Natalie touched her reddening cheek, shock written across her features. Emma, No. Emma stepped back, moving to stand beside Maggie. I'm done. I'm 16. In Maryland, I can petition the court to choose my own guardian, and I choose Grandma Maggie. You can't. I'm your mother. Biologically, maybe. Emma's voice was hard as diamonds. But Grandma's the one who raised me. She's the one who came to every school play you were too busy for, every parent-teacher conference you missed. Every night I cried because you called me clingy for wanting a hug. Father Patrick stepped forward, pulling an envelope from inside his cassock. James gave me this 3 weeks before his death. It's his last will and testament, properly witnessed and notarized. In it, he names Margaret Anderson as Emma's legal guardian should anything happen to him. He handed it to Sarah, who opened it and nodded. This is legally binding, and given the evidence of financial fraud, coercion, and emotional manipulation, Sarah looked at Natalie with something approaching pity. You don't have a leg to stand on. Any lawyer worth their salt will advise you to settle this quietly before it becomes criminal. Natalie collapsed back onto the couch, her whole body crumpling like a marionette with cut strings. For a long moment, she just sat there, staring at nothing, while her entire world burned down around her. Then she laughed, a broken, horrible sound. You know what's funny? I actually loved him. At first. When we met at that gallery opening, and he was so passionate about architecture, so full of dreams, I thought I'd found someone special. Someone who'd take me away from my father's debt and my mother's disappointment and all the ways I'd never measured up. Her voice dropped to a whisper. But somewhere along the way, his dreams started feeling like anchors dragging me down, and I stopped seeing the man and started seeing the obstacle, the thing standing between me and the life I deserved. She looked up at Emma, her eyes red and swollen. I never meant to be a bad mother. I didn't know how to be anything else. Emma said nothing, just stood there with Maggie's arm around her shoulders, choosing silence over forgiveness. The Baltimore County Courthouse smelled like floor wax and old wood, and the particular kind of anxiety that came with having your entire future decided by a stranger in a black robe. Maggie sat in the front row of the courtroom, Emma on her left, Sarah on her right. Across the aisle, Natalie sat alone, her expensive lawyer beside her, but no family, no friends, nobody to hold her hand while the judge read through the settlement agreement. Judge Michelle Rodriguez, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and the kind of face that had seen every variety of human ugliness, adjusted her reading glasses and looked down at the parties. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, she said. Miss Cunningham, you're agreeing to the following terms. 1. You relinquish all claims to the property at 2847 Guilford Road, acknowledging Margaret Anderson as the sole legal owner. 2. You agree to repay the outstanding loan of $78,462 through a structured payment plan overseen by the court. 3. You transfer the $500,000 life insurance payout to a trust for Emma Anderson, with Margaret Anderson as trustee. And 4. You agree to supervised visitation with your daughter, 1 weekend per month, pending family counseling. Natalie's voice was barely audible. Yes, Your Honor. And you understand that if you violate any of these terms, Ms. Mitchell here will file criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit bankruptcy fraud? Yes, Your Honor. Judge Rodriguez looked at Emma. Young lady, I understand you've chosen to live with your grandmother. Are you certain this is what you want? Emma stood up, her voice clear and strong. Yes, ma'am. Grandma Maggie is the only parent I have left. The judge's expression softened. All right, then. She signed the papers with a flourish. Petition for guardianship is granted. Ms. Anderson, congratulations. You're now Emma's legal guardian. Maggie closed her eyes, breathing out relief like a prayer. It was over. Outside the courthouse, spring sunshine poured down like honey. Cherry blossoms drifted on the breeze, pink and white and impossibly delicate. Natalie emerged from the courthouse alone, clutching her designer purse like a life raft. She stopped when she saw Maggie and Emma waiting by the car. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Two women who'd fought a war and both lost things they'd never get back. Margaret, Natalie finally said, I know this doesn't mean anything, but I'm sorry. For all of it, Maggie studied her daughter-in-law's face, the lines of defeat, the absence of makeup, the roots showing gray in her blonde hair. Are you sorry for what you did? Maggie asked quietly. Or sorry you got caught? Natalie flinched. Both, I think. At least you're honest about that much. Maggie unlocked the car. You have my number if you want to arrange those supervised visits. Emma deserves the chance to have a relationship with her mother, if you can figure out how to be one. And if I can't, then that's on you, not her. Maggie opened the passenger door for Emma. But I hope you'll try, for James's sake, if nothing else. Natalie nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. Will you tell her? Tell Emma that I do love her? In my own broken way? Tell her yourself, Maggie said, when you're ready to mean it. She got in the car and drove away, leaving Natalie standing on the courthouse steps, a solitary figure against the spring sky. 1 year later, the house on Guilford Road had never looked better. Maggie stood in the kitchen, her kitchen, legally and completely hers now, watching Emma frost cupcakes for the Scholarship Foundation's inaugural event. The girl had grown 3 inches in the past year, her face losing its childish roundness, her movements gaining the grace of approaching womanhood. Grandma, does this look okay? Emma held up a cupcake decorated with purple frosting and a tiny edible mortarboard. It's perfect, love. Maggie smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the oven. Just like you. The doorbell rang, and Emma wiped her hands on her apron, one of Patrick's old work aprons that she'd claimed as her own. I'll get it. She disappeared, and Maggie heard voices in the foyer. Sarah's professional tone, Dennis's gravelly laugh, Father Patrick's booming Irish greeting. They'd all become fixtures in the house over the past year. Sarah came for Sunday dinners. Dennis helped Emma with her math homework. Father Patrick blessed the house every feast of St. Patrick and told increasingly ridiculous stories about growing up in County Cork. They'd become family, in the way chosen families always felt more solid than blood sometimes. By 2 o'clock, the house was full of people. 5 young women, the first recipients of the James M. Anderson Memorial Scholarship for nursing students, sat in the living room with their families, looking nervous and proud and hopeful all at once. Maggie stood at the front of the room, Emma beside her, and addressed the gathered crowd. My son James, she began, her voice steady despite the tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, believed that buildings weren't just structures. They were homes, communities, places where people could feel safe and loved and valued. She looked at the 5 scholarship recipients. This house has been my home for 42 years. I raised my son here, lost my husband here, fought to keep it when someone tried to take it away, and now it's going to help send young women into the world to do what I did for 40 years, care for people when they're at their most vulnerable. She held up a framed photograph of James at his college graduation, grinning with his arms around both his parents. James didn't get to see his daughter graduate, didn't get to build all the buildings he dreamed of, but his legacy lives on, in Emma, in this scholarship, and in every life you girls touch as nurses. One of the recipients, a young Latina woman named Sofia Martinez, raised her hand shyly. "Mrs. Anderson, why do you still volunteer at the hospital? You could be retired, traveling." Maggie smiled. "Because retirement isn't about stopping, dear. It's about starting something that matters. And teaching the next generation of nurses, that matters." Emma stepped forward, holding a stack of envelopes. "Each scholarship is for $15,000 per year, renewable for 4 years if you maintain a 3.0 GPA. That should cover most of your tuition at any Maryland nursing program." She handed out the envelopes, and the room erupted in tears and hugs and thank yous. Later, after everyone had left and the house was quiet again, Maggie and Emma sat on the front porch with glasses of lemonade, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. "Grandma," Emma said softly, "do you think Dad would be proud of us?" Maggie reached over and took her granddaughter's hand. "I think your dad is at peace, sweetheart, because he knows you're safe and loved and becoming exactly the kind of person he hoped you'd be. I miss him so much. Me too, baby girl, every single day." Maggie squeezed Emma's hand. "But you know what? He's still here, in your kindness, your strength, your determination to do the right thing even when it's hard." Emma leaned her head on Maggie's shoulder. "Mom called yesterday, asked if she could come to my birthday party next month." "And what did you say?" "I said I'd think about it." Emma was quiet for a moment. "Is it wrong that I still want her in my life, after everything?" "Oh, love, no." Maggie kissed the top of Emma's head. "Wanting your mother to love you isn't wrong. It's human. Just make sure you protect your heart while you figure out if she's capable of being what you need." They sat in comfortable silence while the stars began to emerge, one by one, in the darkening sky. Inside the house, Maggie's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Johns Hopkins early decision results tomorrow. Fingers crossed." Maggie smiled. Emma had applied to the nursing program, following in her grandmother's footsteps, though she claimed it was because someone needs to carry on the family tradition of terrifying incompetent doctors. The girl had her father's heart and her grandmother's steel spine. She was going to be just fine. 2 years later, Emma Anderson stood on the steps of Johns Hopkins Hospital in her crisp white nursing student uniform, holding an acceptance letter to the RN program and grinning so wide her face hurt. Beside her, Maggie Anderson, 69 years old and showing no signs of slowing down, wore her own white coat as a volunteer nursing instructor. "Ready for your first day, Nurse Anderson?" Maggie teased. "Ready as I'll ever be, Nurse Anderson," Emma shot back. They walked into the hospital together, 3 generations of healers continuing a legacy that had started with a scared Irish immigrant who'd worked double shifts to buy a house and build a life. Behind them, in the parking lot, a sleek black Mercedes pulled into a visitor's spot. Natalie Cunningham, now Natalie Richardson, having remarried a kind accountant who asked nothing of her except honesty, sat gripping the steering wheel, watching her daughter disappear into the hospital. She'd spent the past 2 years in therapy, working through her issues with money and control, and the desperate need for external validation. She'd declared bankruptcy, lost her real estate license, and moved to a modest townhouse in Delaware. And slowly, painfully, she'd started to rebuild a relationship with Emma. Supervised visits had become coffee dates. Coffee dates had become occasional dinners. It wasn't perfect. It might never be perfect. But it was honest, which was more than she'd ever given her daughter before. She pulled out her phone and sent a text to Emma. "Good luck today. Your dad would be so proud. I'm proud too. Love you." The response came a minute later. "Thanks, Mom. See you for dinner next week?" Natalie smiled through her tears and typed back, "I'll be there." She started the car and drove away, leaving the hospital and its history behind. Finally, moving forward instead of grasping at a past that had never really belonged to her anyway.